Good morning and welcome to AutoTalk Live. I am Richard Edwards. So that's not AutoTalk Live. Oh, I almost gave something away there. The AutoTalk Weekly Wrap. I am Richard Edwards, your host. And today we've got a slightly different format than what we normally have. We are going to bring in Anthony Maclean to talk about his predictions for 2024. He does this every year. Sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong. And he's going to run through his thoughts for the year. And then we are going, through it, we're going to make sure, we're going to see if we agree with him. We're going to see if we don't agree, whether we challenge him, see what happens. So, if you're watching, feel free to comment. I think some of the platforms will get through to us and we can answer questions. Otherwise, we'll go and answer them afterwards. I know a lot of you watch this later in the day or listen to it when you're on your drive home or something like that. So, ask those. And we're actually going to have a look around and answer some questions maybe next week. We'll see how we go with that. If you are in the room, do say hello. Now, I'm going to bring in my usual cohort, Mr. McDonald. How are you today?
Exceptionally well, thank you, Richard, and virtually in holiday mode here, so I might sort of chip away a couple of bits and pieces. And I was going to say for Anthony, don't worry, because even a stock clock is right twice a day, so predictions-wise, you're going to get 50% of it correct.
Yes, last show before you're away for a couple of weeks, if I've got that correct. Yes,
that's the one.
You're away for a lot of shows this year, but we'll let that go. We'll let that go.
How has action from some sneaky ones?
How has January been on the yard? Because I'm hearing from a few people that it sucks out there right now.
Oh,
that's the technical business term. Yeah.
So I'm not giving away any trade secrets here because I think talked to a number of different guys out there, guys and girls in the business. January has been horrid. It has been beyond horrific, and it's not just the car industry. Everyone you talk to is talking the same story. There's just no business out there. People aren't spending money. I've got a good friend of mine in the transport sector who's got half his equipment parked up right now because there's no work, and this is the ag sector. He knows guys out there with other fleets that are literally, it's cheaper to park the trucks up and just pay the drivers than it is to operate. The people I buy coffee from said no one's buying their coffee. They're certainly not buying cars. And so January, I think, once we see the numbers, and it's a bit of a pity I'm not going to be here to talk about it next week, but I don't think they're going to be pretty at all. It's been a really, really rough month across all the sectors. I would say probably one of the hardest months I've known since I've been in this trade since 1988. No kidding.
Ouch. No kidding. Unless you've got a ute to deliver, I guess. But even then, just because you're delivering utes doesn't mean that that's money necessarily flowing in the door. That could have been done a while ago, or you could be filling a giant cash flow hole you've been paying interest on. Really, it's a challenging time for everyone.
Absolutely, and there's different sectors that are still going to do well, obviously, and then there's a sort of division between new and used, and the new sector between the corporate fleets, the construction fleets. Everything's a bit different, but I think overall for an industry, it is. I feel sorry for us all out there. It's been a really, really hard month, and there's not necessarily a sign of it changing in the next 3 or 4 weeks either. The crystal ball's broken, but I think it's going to be tough for a little while longer yet.
Is it going to change, Anthony?
I think the year will get better, but the one thing that's probably carrying some of the new car dealers through is all the utes that got pushed from December through to January. That's probably a small glimmer of sunshine for the market. If you're a brand that's very dependent on utes and you managed to pre-sell a bunch last year, you weren't going to register them in December. So that's the flip side. But what Graham's saying is absolutely on the money.
Mm-hmm. I guess the issue with pre-selling though is if you took deposits for those cars back then, and maybe your margin at the dealer end is not that much bigger than your deposit, well, half the cash that you're coming in the door is kind of gone, really, isn't it?
Well, it causes cash flow issues for the dealers for sure, because they've got the stock and they're paying floor plan on it, and interest is expensive. So there's certainly that element to it. Having said all of that, a dealer would still rather sell a car and take the order, a month or two in advance. Certainly, there were dealers doing pretty skinny ute deals and rebating the fee to get deals over the line to close the year off. But December was scrappy for a lot of people with utes, and conversely, it means there's stuff pushed over. So painful, but I think that's why I call it a glimmer of sunshine rather than anything stronger than that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Right now, we will get to your predictions for the year, but first we're going to speed run through the news of the week. So remember that, guys. We're speed running through this. No long diatribes. This would be way harder if our Wellington correspondent was here today. He's full of excellent information.
I didn't say that, Richard.
We love you, David. We love you. You added a lot of actual real information rather than just the crap that we spout, but it does take time. Now, let's just run through the fuel. So, Brown admits fuel excise distorted. Transport Minister Simeon Brown has acknowledged that current levels of fuel excise have been distorted and says the differential created that will see electric vehicles pay more than petrol and hybrid counterparts should be seen in the context of it being temporary. The comments came in response to questions from AutoTalk noting the disparity between the amount paid towards transport funds through either excise or road user charges for the same size vehicles. The example used a Toyota RAV4 owner will pay $44 per 1,000 kilometers at Rightcast suggested a fuel efficiency rates. That's for a hybrid one. A petrol RAV4 $66, an electric equivalent Toyota BZ4X $76. Brown admits there is an issue, noting efficiency should have no bearing on how much is paid for road use. The fuel excise duty system relies on fuel as a proxy for road use, Brown says, but increased fuel efficiency has created a distortion in the amount of fuel excise duty paid. It is our belief the efficiency of a vehicle should have no bearing on the amount of maintenance costs users pay towards upkeep. So that's an interesting one there. He has basically then gone on to repeat about 3 or 4 times that ruck for everyone is coming, which will be really interesting. I mean, Graham, how much harder will it be to sell a small Toyota hybrid when you've got to pay $76 a kilometer, 100 per 1,000 kilometers to drive it?
Because the same person buying the small non-hybrid Toyota is going to pay the $76 as well. I'm going to say, Richard, first of all, my comment on the story is, well, duh, everyone knew that there was going to be a little bit of disparity between the different brackets. And irrespective of where we sit in the industry, for the general public out there, they don't care a damn. I think that the media, and I don't use that phrase in a negative sense, the media have paid more attention and made more noise in this than the public are willing to hear. People don't care. I think there's a general sense out there that EVs have had a soft ride for too long. And again, this is not a personal opinion. This is just telling you what we are hearing. And that this is just simply a leveling of the playing field. About time. Yeah, it's a bit of a blunt instrument. So what? Let them pay the bloody road user and we'll get on with it. And yes, Brown has read the room to an extent, I think, around commentary from yourself and from other media outlets that have identified this disparity. But the general audience, the general public, it's just a non-story. And I think that, yes, we also are being gradually softened up for the idea of road use across the entire fleet. But as we've talked on this show a number of times, that's like a 15-headed hydra, which they have got a long way, I think, to work out the nuts and bolts of before we see it implemented. And the national coalition will be really careful, I think, to make sure that those bolts are ironed out properly before it's introduced.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts, Anthony?
Actually, I've got $1 each way on this one. He's right. Simeon is right in that road users shouldn't be dependent upon fuel efficiency. It should be about wear on the road. But of course, as has been for a long time, an efficient diesel is penalised. An efficient diesel car is penalised under the road user regime. Actually, what they need is something that's that covers weight and usage and Ks and also efficiency, and there might be 2 or 3 different ways that they stitch that together. And in fact, I've got that as one of my points later on. So I think there's more to watch in this space because clearly the government needs to have an integrated plan about reducing emissions and having a fair way of levying a charge for kilometres covered. And I think that when you see one piece of legislation change on its own, you kind of go, well, there's a discrepancy. But actually, we haven't seen what they've got planned yet, and we don't know, other than probably everybody will pay road user. And I think if it comes in with something else around efficiency, then actually you might end up with something that stitches together quite well. And it may, to Graham's point, actually, or against Graham's point, it may nudge people into choosing smaller, lighter, and more efficient cars in time, depending on what they come up with.
My expectation is they'll come out with a road user charges scheme for everyone that's based on weight. and they'll be in weight bandings based on GBM or something like that, which will be fair. It's Graham. There's very few EV drivers arguing they shouldn't be paying road user charges. It's pretty much consensus amongst certainly the online groups that paying road user charges is fair. What it has exposed is that there is a system that I actually think was kind of working as designed when it came to petrol excise, but in the context of what is being done now, it's exposed that there is an unfairness there. Some could argue there is no unfairness because if you are doing less environmental damage by using a car that uses less fuel, then arguably maybe there should be some benefit to that. But the problem being is you've got the minister at the same time and the government being very vitriolic about the fact that this is about fairness and equity and everyone should pay the same. And that's where they've kind of set themselves up for having to do something with the system. So, yeah. Right. Speaking of small, efficient vehicles. Oh, we should mention on that. Let's not forget the market for small diesels was pretty much killed in New Zealand by road user charges.
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
Weirdly, it was probably...
Talk about inequity.
Weirdly, it was probably beneficial. So, yeah, I mean... the cynic could suggest the government wants to do the same with electric vehicles for some unknown reason, but I don't think they will. Right. Speaking of small, efficient vehicles that Graham loves, the Aqua wins the unwanted title of New Zealand's most stolen car. Insurance brand AMI has released its list of the top 10 stolen cars 2023. For the second year running, the Toyota Aqua holds the title of New Zealand's most stolen car, according to AMI. Sourced from General Insurance data, reported almost 70,000 vehicle theft claims last year. So yes, if we go to the list, it was the Toyota Aqua, the Nissan Tiida, Toyota Corolla, Mazda Demio, Mazda Atenza, Toyota Mark X, Toyota Vitz, Subaru Impreza, Subaru Legacy, and then the Toyota Hilux. There's an interesting one here that someone put out to me. That list is pretty much consistent through the country, except for one location, which has a car that's not even on the top 10 as its top most stolen car, and that's on the West Coast, the Holden Commodore. And I'm taking a wild guess. It was one Holden Commodore that was stolen on the West Coast, and they got it to the top 10 list. And I got to guess it wasn't really stolen. It was just that Bruce wandered out of the car park at the pub after a couple of cold ones, and there were about 8 Holden Commodores in a row, and he jumped in the wrong Holden Commodore.
just forgot where it was. I've got a different take on this story. We're actually talking about it here yesterday. If you look at the list, okay, what's the other factor of that top 10 list? What's the other thing that 9 out of those 10 vehicles have in common? Which is they're also the best-selling vehicles in New Zealand. And so statistics are a wonderful thing. Now, I'm not defending the Aqua. You know, we're amongst friends here. Yes, Aquas are stolen for ram raids and bits and pieces. So are Tiidas and things like that too. Although, again, the industry is never particularly quick to point out that it's only the Keystart earlier models that you can nick easily. They're the ones that have built in Immobilize, which makes it a whole lot harder.
I think it's actually your second point, which is more important than the top selling. Because if we roll through this list very briefly, the Nissan Tiida hasn't been a top 10 selling car in New Zealand for a few years now. And if we want to look at overall top selling cars, where are the Rangers and where are the, you know?
Go to one of your DMS providers and type in the most populous vehicle in New Zealand. And until last year, the most populous vehicle in New Zealand was the 2006 Nissan Tiida. And there were over at that stage, I think it was 12,000 examples rolling around our road. The 2005 Nissan Tiida was either second or third on the list. And so if you look at simply the demographic of how many of those things we have, if we're pumping, how many Aquas are we doing per month right now? Some crazy number. Of course, there are more on the road, and of course, proportionately, they're going to get nicked. Same with the Tiida that is still out there chucking away. We haven't scrapped them all yet. We can start doing that in the next couple of years. And the Corolla, obviously, consistently the top selling yes. And the Demio, same thing. We sold those by the transporter load a number of years ago. We just couldn't fire them off the back fast enough, and now they're turning up to the list. The outlier of that is the Mark X, because they are genuinely a very popular vehicle for ram raiding and other illicit activity in the burbs of South Auckland and West Auckland, because they're bloody strong. Not that they're difficult, easy to steal, sorry. It's just that they're a strong car with a bit of cred. They're the New Forester of South and West Auckland, in case you
know. Your confidence in how many Tiidas are on the road may have been a little bit overstated there. if you go look at Trade Me, there's pretty much the same number of Teeters for sale as Mark X's. I think it's 180 Mark X's to 200 Teeters, 3,000 Aquas. So the Teeters definitely, I think, overrepresented for what it is. The Aqua, definitely there by volume.
But I would say if you're trying to get a gauge of used vehicles, all you're doing is getting a gauge of used vehicles available on Trade Me. The Teeters all go on Facebook Marketplace now because they're at that price point where people don't want to pay the listing fees for Trade Me.
You're absolutely right, Anthony. That's not a joke either. That is the truth of it. Trade Me is not necessarily the indicator of market activity anymore.
Not anymore.
We need a website. Like in the UK, they have a website where you just jump on and search how many of a particular model are left. Here it is, how many left.co.uk. We need something like that in New Zealand that we could go in and jump on and solve arguments like this very quickly.
But I do think, for me, I think what's interesting about that list is that they're nearly all used imports. And I actually have a very, very different view to Graham on this. The challenge is, and I know there's Corolla on there, the one vehicle that stands out for me is Hilux. Because that isn't sold as an import, it's almost exclusively New Zealand new. But most of those vehicles on that list that are stolen are almost definitely used imports. In fact, Subaru a number of years back made a point of saying, actually, all the Subarus stolen in New Zealand, they're all grey imports. They're not New Zealand new because we have a rolling code immobilizer. The UK went through this 20, 30 years ago where just stuff was being stolen all the time, and they introduced mandatory immobilizers, and of course they don't have a grey import market like we do. But I actually think it's to our shame that between VIA and the Insurance Council that they haven't come up with some kind of way to reduce the ability for these vehicles to be stolen very easily.
Interesting to see. We've seen a lot less ram raids lately. I wonder what's doing that. But yeah.
It's a new government in power.
They've changed it all, haven't they?
I heard that, but I also heard that the stats had already started dropping before the new government came in. So.
It's nothing to do with the government, but the challenge is that we should, as an industry, I think, as a wider industry, tackle these cars that have very, very low levels of security. Probably locks that aren't shielded, stuff that's no immobilizers, a whole bunch of stuff like this. It's not really acceptable at this stage to essentially facilitate. I guess it's probably the wrong word, but we're facilitating theft by having cars that are very, very easy to steal. Corollas on there, I suspect, are probably used import Corollas rather than New Zealand new ones, because I suspect, and I'm using the word suspect a lot here, but I suspect that there's a lot of the imports probably because they're Japanese domestic, where theft isn't really a big problem, don't have much security, whereas the New Zealand new ones probably have a lot more.
But if we make a bit about mousetrap, we're just going to breed a bit of mouse. I mean, that's the thing, If you make it harder to steal, they just get better at stealing them.
Most of the Mark X's, for example, on that list there, most of those have built-in immobilizers. The criminals out there are a lot smarter than we might think they are. We went through this a number of years ago. I'm thinking probably 15 years ago, there was debate in the industry about immobilizers, and there was quite a bit of fuss to do. And so there's two questions, Anthony, to answer. One is, who pays for it? And secondly, who's taking liability for adding security systems or mobilization systems to vehicles that aren't necessarily designed for it and fail down the track? And one of the great fears of the trade was that some of these vehicles are pretty straightforward. Look, I don't think you can do too much harm with an aqua system, for example, when it comes to fitting an immobilizer. But a lot of the vehicles are far more complex that adding aftermarket security systems to. And the security companies just sort of nod their head and say, sometimes these things don't go quite according to plan, and they come at horrific cost to actually getting to function correctly within the car's system. And it was a really hard nut to crack. And it came down to who's going to pay for it, because it adds quite a significant cost. Who's going to police the fact that it does have it? And then thirdly, who's going to accept the liability for it when it breaks?
I think these are questions that I don't have to have the answer to on a podcast, but certainly I think it's to our shame that we haven't, and industry as well as insurance industry, as well as the used vehicle import industry, and as well as the dealer network, that we haven't addressed this yet. I think it's to our shame that we haven't done that.
Hey, look, if we fix the import issue, people will just run around starting Hyundais and Kias with USB drives. Isn't that what they do in the US? Is that how it works there?
I was going to say, just quietly, you can steal New Zealand new cars too.
It's not a dig at the used car
No.
industry, Graham. It's simply that I find it really difficult that we haven't addressed. I find it quite amazing that we haven't addressed it. Look, the UK went through this, so it's not an impossible. It's not an impossible thing to fix.
Last time I was a victim of vehicle crime was in the UK. I was driving a Vauxhall Insignia VXR, stopped at a motorway services, and got done by what was a relatively common thing there, is they have gangs basically hanging around, tucked away in the car park, and they use either jammers or cloners. So when you go to lock your car, it either blocks the signal so your car doesn't lock, or it clones it, and then they repop open the car, and had stuff taken, unfortunately. So the tech is there for even the New Zealand new stuff. Right, let's carry on. CCD exit impact not over yet, says Subaru MD. Subaru New Zealand Managing Director Wallace, or I'm going to say Waldumper, says the exit of the clean car discount will continue to impact the new car market in 2024 and beyond. At the media launch of the new Subaru Solterra BEV and the new Subaru Impreza hatchback, Dumper says that the CCD distorted market so much that total sales of electrified vehicles in December were... we've gone through the stats before. He says the industry is nervous about the review of the clean car standard by Transport Minister Simeon Brown and what further impact it will have on the market. There's no doubt the market's change and impacts on business will continue. Government intervention will cause ongoing disruptions when in reality it is the customers who should decide what the market does, he says. Dove says he's concerned about further interventions into the CCS, which currently provides electric vehicles with credits but penalizes CO2 emitting products, which sees a lower CO2 average brought in annually with a higher fee. Basically, what he's saying there is the CCD kind of means you could sort of have. I think he says to make the most of the CCD, you've actually got to bring in cars that do emit something. Because you can't really do a huge amount with them in the market at the moment. Interesting take. Read it. We'll let you guys go and check that one out for yourself. Suzuki New Zealand garners 1,000 prospects for Jimny 5-door SUV. So they've launched that car last week. They're saying got lots of demand for it, and they will be selling it for some time to come. The little 5-door starts at $49.90 plus on-road costs for the 5-speed manual. Interestingly, they say they will shift 50-50 automatic and manual. Is there a model in the market now that would still say that? Even Utes, I imagine, wouldn't be shifting 50-50 auto to manual.
So one thing I'd like to know about that I've never actually checked is, does the manual version have effectively an open gearbox so that you can tow it behind things? Because one of the great hallmarks of the old Suzuki Vitaras and Jimnys and stuff that had four-wheel drive was you could pop it into neutral and you could tow it behind a motorhome. You can't do that with most vehicles.
It's still a manual system, so you can put both the transfer case and the manual transmission into manual, into neutral mode.
The rub.
So
there's the rub. What a cool little truck. I mean, I've never really paid much attention to them until suddenly I started paying attention to how many there are out there and how many people were talking about them. They're one of those little soft launches that Suzuki snuck upon the populace, and everyone's just said, oh, I quite like that.
They are
5-door. Yeah, cool.
The 3-door is terrible to drive, but it's also terrible fun. So you can't.
Yep.
Kind of cuts both ways in that. When I was up in India early this year, the 5-doors were really popular. I saw them around a lot of places. They were they were really taking off there. So yeah, it's a cool vehicle. Is it like a true Jimny? I mean, it's getting quite long in the wheelbase for a little SUV, but yeah, bit of fun. Possibly more for the city than the hardcore off-road that the smaller one can do when set up right. We've already run that story. Let's move on from there. Last couple of ones. Tire-wise starts March 1. The Waste Minimisation Tyres Regulation 2023 Act takes effect from March 1, 2024 and will require those importing or selling regulated tyres with a looser attached to vehicle to register with the Tire-wise scheme. If I've got this right, you got to pay a few bucks on the tyre. They sort of, funds the industry to work out what it's going to do with them at the end. Prices on light vehicle tyres are $33.25 per vehicle. For cars and SUVs or vans and utes cost $66.70 per vehicle. You going to pass that on in the invoice to your customer, Graham, or are you just swallowing it?
Well, I mean, that's the idea behind the scheme, was to make sure we're just typically speaking on-road costs. So once again, we trundle out to the printer, and once again, we print up window cards differently on the 31st of March for all the vehicles that we've got in stock. And once again, I get a bit sick of this. It's been a year of just printing out different shit at the whim of officials. And I don't mean this in a negative to the officials that put these together. This is bad timing, but oh my God, you want to save the planet some dolphins? Stop us printing out shit on every vehicle every 3 months, would you?
Graham, I've told you I'm working on a solution for it. Working on a solution.
Yeah, I know. We did these conversations. Watch the space. However, yes, I think it's a game of smoke and mirrors, isn't it? You can either choose to absorb it in your pricing, which just means your pricing is a bit higher than somebody else's, or you can genuinely do it as was designed to reflect in the on-road cost of the vehicle and use another charge on top. We explain it to a customer. I'd argue and say most dealers do either a particularly rubbish job of explaining what on-road costs and charges actually are, or they don't care, or they actually genuinely have no idea at all, apart from trundling down to the local branch of ETNZ and getting their merchandise in place.
We've got a comment. Kit Wilkins says, I agree, RUC has nothing to do with efficiency. Anyway, let's flick on through a few more stories here. Automotive pyrotechnic disposal change. So the military will no longer blow up your blow upper bills. There's now a private company handling that. Anyone seen one of those blow up? They are hilarious. One of the best things we've ever seen was the PR guy at Ford New Zealand. Back when they had their facility out in Manukau, got us around to watch a whole pile of them being triggered on their tennis court. Amusing. They are a big bang. Inflation down in the December quarter. New Zealand's annual inflation figures have dropped to 4.7% in the 12 months to December 2023 quarter. It was down from 5.6% annual inflation in the September quarter, according to the latest Stats New Zealand figures. It's the CPI had the smallest rise in over 2 years. Not sure exactly what that means in the long run for the mortgage interest rates. I'm sure others will have better predictions on that, maybe today. Transport Group, which makes up 13.5% of the CPI basket, fell 0.3%. I'm guessing, I don't know whether that was a fuel thing or not. Anyway, last one today is one that'll might trigger Graham, in that GWM adds a petrol variant into the Tank 300 range. Well, really, they finally actually landed the Tank 300. So this is this kind of Chinese opposition to the Jeep Wrangler. It's selling like hotcakes in Australia. 2-litre turbo or 2-litre hybrid options. A really interesting vehicle, and $49,990, including GST plus on-roads. A car that I think was kind of held back in New Zealand for the sake of the clean car discount. They wanted the clean car discount gone before that vehicle arrived in the country, because I think it puts out a bit of CO2, even the hybrid.
Yeah. Good old dirty COs. I'm not triggered. I've heard a lot about these. We've been sort of muttering about the tank for quite some time on its various bit. I'd like to see one, which is a bit of a broad hint to my compatriot there, Richard. I actually would like to see one and try one, because there's been a lot talked about it. Yep, they're doing really well in Australia. Let's have a look.
Yeah. I mean, the Wrangler was already in a bit of trouble, and I think this is just kind of making it worse. And over in Australia, just the way they've turned to them, and the enthusiast groups have jumped on them. There's an accessory market for them already, and they've literally been on the road there for maybe 6 months at most. There's already YouTube channels dedicated to them. I'm not saying they're great. I'm not saying they're perfect, but it's probably the only Chinese internal combustion engine powered car I've seen to really get a following behind it very quickly. We've seen that with EVs, but first time we've seen it with a petrol car, and it'll be interesting to see what it does in New Zealand compared to over the other side of the Tasman. Right.
Hey, we could do some durability testing, Richard. We could assist with that.
We could drive it up Lincoln Road and dodge potholes.
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll work.
Yes. Right. Mr. Maclean, you're gonna tell us what you think is going to happen over the next 12 months,
and then I'm going to be challenged by you and Graham about whether I'm talking nonsense or not. But let's do that. Let's talk through what I think is going to happen on the year ahead. Actually, we've touched on a couple of things which I think are going to happen, but there's a broad brush stroke. This is my third set of annual predictions, which I've been doing since I formed Boost Auto. They're meant to be thought-provoking rather than 100% guaranteed accuracy. But that's the idea really at the start of the year, isn't it? To sort of think about what's going to affect your business in the year ahead. So good. Shall I crack on?
Yeah, go ahead, mate. It's your show now.
Good stuff. Now is that's not moving. 1 second. Okay, so I think first up, we're going to see an absolute brand bonanza lolly scramble for 2024 for new brands coming through. Obviously, very well signposted is Omoda and Jayco, which is Chery's two new brands, and I think they're going to start selling next month, aren't they? They've got all the dealers announced, so that's not a secret. But as a bit of context, Chery until last year was China's biggest exporter of cars, and people don't really know that. That's the sort of scale of how big Chery are. But I think you'll see at least 4 new brands coming, probably 6 this year. They take a little bit of time to come to market. Chery's launch, I think, was probably delayed by Clean Car and not having EVs and the like. They were going in Australia beforehand. I've had a lot of conversations in the last 4 months, I would say, about brands that are looking for partners. So I think you're going to see a lot of stuff come to market. I think most of them, a few of them will be BEV only, but I don't think exclusively. And I think that sort of shift in Clean Car will sort of muddy the waters a little bit, because earlier New Zealand was a very clear, our sales of EVs were very strong relative to market size as a result of the Clean Car rebate. But don't necessarily expect cheap and cheerful. I think Chery won't be cheap. It'll be value, but it won't be cheap. One of the brands that's coming is or a couple of brands that are coming are quite high end. So I think you're going to see that real maturity of the brands coming through as well. So and I've got one more slide on that a little bit later. So new brand bonanza is number 1. I think this is a controversial one. I think EV RVs are going to strengthen. Right now, they're all over the place. You've got softer demand, you've got people pulling back, you've got Clean Car rebate stopped, you've got rental companies selling off EV stock. So that all points to a sort of suppression of EVs. And late last year, if you were trying to place a Model 3 in the dealer network, you would be bid pennies for them, because none of the dealer network wanted Model 3. And it felt like it was in free fall for a little while in terms of residual. But actually, I think that was an anomaly caused by Model Y arriving, and a lot of people who had 3 trying to buy Y, Tesla not buying them back, and there was a lot of stock around. So that's the sort of starting point. Secondly, late last year there was a bit of a price war. So Tesla dropped its price, got down to 62.5, I think, at the lowest point, plus some rebates. Then there were some brands who introduced stuff that was what I would call a bit of a misstep. So you had, like, for example, you had Aura. Aura was never going to sell at 49,990. It took them a long time to realize it, and towards the end of the year they got to like 43. Enyaq was never going to sell at 84, but a few people put their hand up, just like ID4 and ID5. And I think what happens is if you end up with that rapid price drop and everybody's trying to realign, of course it shakes everybody's confidence in EVs. So I think you got a bit of a chain reaction from Model 3. Even MG ZS repriced. They added bonuses, and then I think they repriced the long range. And then you get stuff that sells in volume all of a sudden, like MG4 at 46. So they've almost been in free fall residually, I think, last year. They were all over the place. And because Tesla don't operate like anybody else, normally if somebody wanted to stimulate demand, they'd do a service package or they do low rate finance. Tesla just dropped the prices. We're not used to that. And that really changes the market, particularly if you're the dominant seller. Now, their dominance here isn't like the dominance they have in other markets, because BYD is strong here and MG strong. But in most other markets, Tesla is 60% of the EV market. That's how strong they are in most developed markets, excluding China. So
I think the other aspect with BEV residual values this year, and you may get to it too, is that I don't think fuel prices are going down anytime soon. I mean, particularly if we see trouble continue around the Red Sea, we're only going to see the price of fuel go up. And if Simeon does manage to push back towards RUC for everything, and they load ETS into the fuel, the cost of at the moment there's a slight lean back towards fossil hybrids and so forth. But if that comes through, then the cost ratio switches back into BEV favor again.
Yeah.
There's also a good point in this, Anthony, just to cut across you for a second. So we're talking about the fear around residuals. I mean, it's been a horrible year, I think, for residual values of EVs across the board, but that's reflected in the trade. So the trade in general, unless you're a specialized EV dealer, has a real reluctance to take on an EV as a trade or as a purchase, because you just can't work out what it actually is worth, or there's a fear that you don't know what it's worth, or you could buy it today and by the time you've got it ready for the yard, it's already come down in value. So the general trade consensus thus far has been that they're a difficult vehicle to pick up as either a trade-in or as a purchase, and that in turn is helping accelerate the depreciation curve.
Yeah, agreed. And so you end up with a long shadow from Tesla's price drops. When you think at RRP, it casts a really long shadow, doesn't it? Because it upsets residuals, it upsets. I think what's interesting about Model 3 and Tesla's lineup in general is it's a very, very simple lineup. So if they change the price, it casts that shadow, sort of the effect of that gets much, much bigger. But rebates have gone, and while that might be poor for consumers, it's actually really good for residuals, because your vehicle today now is not lower by the price of the rebate. So conversely, with rebates gone, it's good news for residual values. I think it'll take 3 to 6 months before they firm up, but I think you'll see RVs for used EVs strengthen considerably. Also because demand will pick up. Part of the shift towards EVs is that sort of bell curve of adoption. And you'll see that the momentum, even though the rate of growth is slowing, it's still strong growth. So you'll see more consumers looking at EVs. They're relatively affordable because their RVs have been soft. So you'll see that strengthening through the year. So not the first 3 months, but certainly from Q2 or Q3, I think you'll see a difference. So, and consumers fundamentally still want affordable EVs. So if they're not cheap enough new, then they'll be cheap enough used. So I think that's why all that stuff together, unless of course Tesla finds the rate of growth globally too low and they have massive excess inventory and away they go again and the cycle starts. I think that's less likely to happen because I think it was pretty painful for them. Which leads me neatly into a bit of Tesla turmoil this year. And I think I've just finished the Musk biography by Walter Isaacson, all 650 pages of it. It's a fascinating book. Gives you a bit of insight into how Musk operates. I won't do a book review here, but I think they're going to have a really tough year this year at Tesla. And they've had to recall 1.6 million cars in China, about 2 million in the US. So pretty much every car they've made almost is being recalled because they've got such a tight lineup. One of the things that's unusual is that firstly, it's a huge percentage of vehicles produced. They're a relatively young company still. Lots of these recalls will be done through over-the-air updates, which in itself is quite unusual for a recall, but not necessarily all of them. They've only got a 5-model range if you include Cybertruck, but only 2 models deliver any volume. So it's all about 3 and Y. Final numbers aren't in. My 2023 prediction was that Model Y would have been the best-selling car in the world. And it's, if it's not number 1, it would have been number 2. RAV4 is the car they had to dethrone from 2022. Final numbers aren't in. You can see pockets where I think it's been the best-selling car in Europe, for example. But a lot of the models are actually quite old. 4 of their 5 models are relatively old. Model S is an absolute dinosaur. It's 11 years old this year. X and S no longer available as right-hand drive. 3 is nearly 5 years old, just had a facelift. Y's got a facelift on the way. So they're not fresh products, and the rate of change in that EV market is quite fast. It's a good job they were a good product in the first place. but I think you'll see them kind of come under increasing pressure from BYD. And what BYD do that Tesla don't do is they do more value products. Cybertruck is going to be a nightmare for them. It's not a core product. I don't think it'll deliver real volume for them. I think its weight and its crash testing will cause trouble for them in other markets. It's not going to be the volume seller that they'd hoped. It's twice as expensive as they promised. They're going to go through production hell on it. Musk has already said that. That's going to drain resources and take focus off other things. Musk is CEO now of 5 businesses, which is absolutely bonkers. And if they'd invested their time and effort in a smaller car, a more affordable car, like they've now signaled once again that they're going to do, which is
the Redwood
/ Model 2, they'd have got they'd get volume. And full self-driving mode is a million years away. They keep saying it's 2 years away or 1 year away. It's $11,000 option in New Zealand, FSD. You've got to get to a point where there's going to be a class action against not actually delivering stuff that people have paid for. And of course, they'll have sold a lot of FSD. They've burned a whole bunch of rental customers, of course, with their price drops. Hertz are selling 20,000 of them because they're committed to 100,000 Teslas. And they're having to do big write-downs. Hertz having to do big write-downs for this disposal. And that's an absolute, shocker for them. And that's one of the things that, going back to the residual. And they've got more capacity coming because they've got more factories on board. So I think what you've got and a softening increase in demand. So I think you've got a lot of balls in the air for Tesla. And I think that their crown of being the sort of hero of the EV market is really at risk. And the brand and the Musk brand is becoming more toxic, I think, as well, which will eventually put people off. I mean, it arguably is already, but I think will put more people off. So I think you're going to see Tesla in real turmoil this year. I think it's going to be a shame because they're an incredibly innovative brand, incredibly innovative, and they've changed so many things in the industry that we almost don't consider that they've changed, but they have been so innovative. But I think they're going to have a really, really tough year. Meanwhile, closer to home, I think ICE is going to get real messy. We've got you've got the Clean Car Standard still affecting what vehicles people can bring in. Now, there was an interesting article that I read about Suzuki saying that Swift, I think, costs them $132 a car right now. But of course, is under the current regime, it's going to get a lot more expensive very quickly because of the way that the Clean Car Standard tightens up. In New Zealand, we're not big buyers of small cars, but I've just come back from Europe and it was a reminder how strong the small car market still is. We talk about small cars being in decline, but they're only in decline in New Zealand, Australia. I mean, globally, yes, they are, but there's still a strong market overseas for them. So I think it adds Clean Car Standard adds scrutiny and cost to higher emitters, whereas hybrids, I think, will really benefit this from this. Cheap polluters are really in the gun, basically, in Clean Car Standard, and people will be wanting to balance their overall obligations, if you like, towards the standard. So
how much do we think Simeon is going to gut the CCS?
I suspect he's going to dial down the future years. That's my guess. I don't think he's going to gut it. I think he's going to dial down the future years, and he might dial it down on the heavy polluters, on utes, as part of their commitment. Although they have to do something in its place, and I think that's the interesting one. They have to do something in its place. They need a policy about cleaning the fleet, and they need an integrated policy about. I think they need an integrated policy about cleaning the fleet too. So I think this is the year of hybrids. I actually think this is a year of hybrids without big discounts, with them getting no or very small penalties, and consumers seeing actually the benefit of hybrids. I think this is the year of the hybrids.
Graham, it's your time to shine.
Well, there's another reason to that too, and don't forget, it's not just driven by demand; it's driven by supply. And Anthony, I think your point is correct. However, as much a part of that is the fact that Japan has gone hybrid sensor cars for a number of years, and we are finally at the point, the last year or two, where those hybrid, that sort of second, third generation hybrid stuff, the came through 5-7 years ago is now entering the resale market en masse in Japan, and it's available at affordable pricing for New Zealand. And it's not just driven by demand here, people wanting hybrids and making more sense in terms of fuel efficiency. It's because hybrids are the predominant model or predominant propulsion method available in Japan, in the used fleets, in auction. That's what we buy because it's there. And it's arrived, and we're buying it because it's there and it fits the price point.
And its time is right for New Zealand, given that there's no big rebates, but given that they're not hit hard by clean gas standard, and there's good supply. Absolutely. So it's a good point. It's supply driven, of course, as well, but it's because we're so dependent upon Japan for our used imports. It's an alignment of stars really for hybrids.
Yes.
Meanwhile, I think we had an absolute distortion, of course, in December on EVs, and National might have pledged to build 10,000 chargers, but we are way behind international benchmarks, and it takes time for the incentives and the plans that the government has got around chargers to come into space. Meanwhile, we've got this big bulge of EVs coming through. I think it'll be interesting to see where the EV market goes this year. My view is it'll be down maybe 20% on last year's volume, maybe 25. It's not going to be killed, but it's certainly going to distort it. And I think around that price cap, there will be a bit of shuffling as well. But you'll also see the impact of, if I'm Ford New Zealand or if I'm Toyota, and Toyota less so because they've got a lot of hybrids in their fleet, which reduces their CO2. But if you're, say, Ford or somebody who sells a lot of utes, you'll need to be selling a lot of you'll have to push your EV product to. Well,
you saw Ford at the end of last year. They kind of came from nowhere to sell an awful lot of electrified product in the last 3 months of the year. Surprise.
Yeah, they did. So I think because of the surge of BEV sales in 2023, we're going to have a bottleneck of charging, and that's going to really put people off. You're going to see that hit the news as people are queuing. I'm surprised we haven't seen any Christmas stories about people queuing, although I've been away, so I might have missed a couple of those.
I'll be quite blunt, because it didn't really actually happen that much. Right. I've done a lot of big trips this summer, and I pretty much didn't have to wait. A lot of that comes from the fact we've seen such a rapid build out from the likes of Z and BP. But also the thing we tend to forget is the EVs that are coming on the market tend to be longer range EVs. These are EVs that'll do 300 to 400k with the family on board, a lot of them, and the volume in the market. And so, while you've got more cars there, they need to charge, to do 500 kilometers, you're talking they charge once as opposed to 4 times like a Nissan Leaf used to. And they charge quickly. And we're seeing a lot more multi-charger installations. I think we compare ourselves against other markets, but also forget the fact that we have a very high percentage of home charging. Even if you compare us to the UK, our home charging is multiple times that of what the UK is. So, I think this one so far is an issue that I'm surprised it hasn't happened, but it doesn't seem to be happening. Last summer, we saw a lot of congestion around some of the key transport routes in the South Island, but a lot of that was very actively solved with new equipment this year. And then, of course, the highways have settled down a little bit, so there's multiple routes now with multiple chargers. So I'm not sure on this one. I almost feel like the market is staying ahead of things. As I said, we've got ChargeNet still going at a fairly solid pace. You've got Z and BP are putting out a lot of chargers. There's another charging network that I know is getting close to launch, and that we're moving pretty fast. It's actually one of my concerns in what the government may potentially do. The government's committed to 10,000 additional chargers. What is that going to mean, and how are they going to spend that money? Because the private market with government assistance is doing pretty darn well at the moment, and I would hope they will continue that rather than messing too much with the formula and giving it all to one company or doing it in any other way than what the current system works. You've got to give Mr. Bridges his credit. The Low Emissions Contestable Fund and the way that it's allowed ECA to fund charging around the country on that co-funding basis, it's working really, really, really well.
Well, I
And
think
also from the trade perspective, we talk about Auckland to Wellington. If you're in North Island, Auckland to Wellington, this car won't do Auckland to Wellington without having to stop for a charge. Well, we forget that most people aren't doing that. I mean, that's a once in a year occasion for a lot of people, if that. So the urban network of charging has got pretty darn good. And if you're selling EVs, or you're attempting to sell EVs to the general public that are not necessarily up to speed with how charging works and what accessibility there is, there's some really good stories out now about good stories you can project about the accessibility to charging in the larger urban areas. And if your staff are not already up to play with what actually is available, and you do have EVs in stock, get them to do some homework on what actually is available. And the old, I can't go to Wellington on a single charge is it's like saying, well, my truck won't go to Invercargill without filling up somewhere. Well, of course it doesn't. So a lot of it's just, I think, around perception, and it starts at the trade around perception of what is realistic for a modern motor vehicle of any propulsion to achieve before you have to replenish its fueling needs.
Now, I'm going to say something controversial here, but how much of a lot of the stuff that's discussed around these negatives of EVs is real versus how much of it is placed information from people wanting to make EVs look bad? Like, I think a lot of the negative sentiment about EVs in New Zealand has either been placed there by people who want to be negative towards EVs, or, and this is where it gets a little more nefarious, how the heck did we end up with electric vehicles being grouped in as an issue alongside anti-vax and three waters and all that kind of stuff? Who the heck did that, and how the heck did that get there? Because it does not, I'm not saying EVs are perfect, but it does not deserve to be there. And I suspect some people with smarter political minds than I may have some responsibility in that aspect.
Oh, I disagree. I disagree with that. I think that wherever you look, you'll find a whole bunch of negative naysayers, regardless of what you're interested in. So I think there's a lack of understanding about EVs, but I wouldn't say there's anything nefarious. There are always some people who kind of, you go down the pub and you talk to somebody who loves a V8 and somebody else loves a V8 and they therefore don't like EVs, then they'll convince themselves. But I don't think
let's not forget that the term the ute tax, which then became an anti-EV thing, was thought up in a political party marketing team room. Let's not kid ourselves about that.
Oh, look, I don't disagree. I think the terminology around UTEX was incredibly damaging, and I think what's going to be interesting for the government is what they do to replace the clean car rebate. What they do with, in fact, I've got a slide about this. We may as well talk about it now. The government needs an integrated plan to reduce emissions, and addition of RUC for EVs, which was well signposted. Actually, everybody knew that they were exempt. It wasn't that they would never pay. They knew it was an exemption for a period, and that's why I don't think there was a lot of pushback about it. But I would say that with the reduction or with the removal of the rebates and the removal of the ute tax, I laugh at that phrase. The government does need an integrated plan to reduce emissions. And I think that VIA have put together some really good proposals around a more integrated plan. And I think that if the government wants to they've got to do something to plug the hole. And if they develop an integrated plan, then I think we'll be fine. I think what we're seeing is a couple of removal of a couple of things, plus a couple of naysayers about EVs. Actually, I think that will settle down. I think that will settle down as the year progresses.
There's something reasonably controversial in there as well, since Richard has a slightly controversial opinion. And again, this is not my opinion. As I see things, one of the difficulties government faces of any ilk now is we've rapidly got to a point where people no longer trust the information that government is giving. And call that the COVID spin-on effect, I don't know. But the more government promotes a particular concept as being the way forward, the more pushback there is, right or wrong, from the great unwashed of the populace. And it's an unfortunate position to be in. And EVs, I think, Richard, to answer your question, got caught up in it a wee bit, where government incentives and push to do this because it was the right thing to do was possibly not well received in the room at a time when the population was starting to question whether what they were doing and government had done was also the right thing to do in their lives. And it's unfortunate because often these incentives and these programs are genuinely good for people. But we have got to a point where the population no longer takes that with a grain of salt. And yes, the EV sector, I think, got caught up in that hype, that it was seen to be a government push against our conventional way of life and our freedoms and what we like to do. And we didn't want to be told what we had to do.
Oh, it's all an evil plan led by Jacinda Ardern in conjunction with the World Economic Forum and the World Health Forum to get you out of your diesel car and into an electric car so they can track where you're going and they can turn off your car if your social credit score doesn't meet. Yeah. one thing on Charging Chaos.
Pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing on Charging Chaos I will say is and please, if someone knows the chief executive of Vector, stop giving away free electricity. Start charging for your charging. Or here's a crazy idea. Just take your chargers out. I know you tried to sell them and you couldn't sell them. Just take them out. The market is better off without them, because every time you hear of queuing or bad behavior or a fight at a charger, it is always a free Vector charger. Giving stuff away for free causes bad habits. Giving stuff away for free stops commercial providers from coming in and offering better solutions than what you're offering in the same area. Anyway, Anthony,
Lordy.
next slide.
Fights at EV charges, man buns and handbags at dawn, right?
If I can just close off on Charging Chaos, just two minor points. We've got a relatively old fleet of EVs. Nissan Leaf sold 200 a month for absolutely ages, and then last year sold, I didn't write the numbers down, but I did have a look when I wrote this. Was it 4,000 or 5,000 Leafs were sold last year, imports? It was a big number. Maybe it was 3,000. It was a much bigger number than normally. Of course, they don't charge. The typical Leaf that comes in is relatively old. They don't charge particularly fast, so therefore they sit on the new chargers. They can't on the super fast chargers. They can't use them because I think the max charge is about 46 kilowatts, something like that. Their charge rate on an older Leaf. So I think
they don't do it for long heat. One of the things I've heard discussed of getting really nerdy is some of the charging operators potentially putting 25 kilowatt ammo units next to entirely CCS fast charge units, because it gives a better overall experience. Doesn't overheat the battery of the Leaf. Is one of the things they're looking at.
I think there'll be a big push. That look, of the 10,000, I think there'll be a big push towards destination charges. And as you know, if you've ever travelled anywhere, you can probably get there okay with only a small queue if you're unlucky at a charger. But actually, when you get to the other end, particularly if you're staying overnight, it starts to become a bit of a desert, and then you've got the chase around to find a charger sort of thing. So I bet a lot of those 10,000 will be destination chargers, which will be just 7 kilowatts, 11 kilowatts overnight. Anyway, moving on. So here we go. So this is the regulation piece. Actually, last year was a dog's dinner for the automotive industry. The July change was awful. It wasn't signaled very well. All of a sudden, customers had long lead times on RAV4s they ordered, weren't getting a rebate. Some of the mild hybrids used imports were getting a rebate and then lost it. It was an absolute horror show, and there was very little warning for it. And now we know that RUC's coming this year. That's fair enough. They've announced that pretty quickly. Now we know there's a Clean Car Standard review coming. There's RUC for ICE coming. There's a lot of stuff going on. And as I said earlier, the government needs a balanced view in order to reduce emissions as well. So I think you've got some other stuff coming to get us on track for lowering emissions. I think you've got other regulations. So actually, the industry has pushed the government to say you can't change this stuff this fast, or you can't make 11th hour changes. And the government hasn't really listened yet. So, the old government didn't, and it'd be interesting to see whether the new government is any different. So I'm just saying, expect more changes, and it's all going to impact. And of course, you've got tire wires as well. So it's all going to impact the industry. I think this amount of regulations coming is quite. And the rate of change, particularly for the regulation, is really, really hard for the industry. And I think there's a lot more to come this year.
I think Simeon will do a few more things on fairly brutal time schedules and then let stuff to settle down into a more natural run of things.
Yeah. But I think this is an interesting one. I've talked about this before, but China's mini car market, which is a sort of a quadricycle equivalent, is absolutely booming. China's consumers also went crazy for Dolphin, and there's a whole bunch of cheap BEVs that you can't get in China that are not mini cars, but will never come here because they won't meet our ANCAP. And ANCAP, I think, is seriously flawed now. I think it's a very singular piece of legislation. In fact, I think in Australia, MG5 got 0 stars on new ANCAP rating, and there was another vehicle that scored very, very low. The challenge I have with ANCAP is it may stop or reduce the availability of affordable EVs, and that's what consumers really, really want. If we're going to switch people from ICE to BEV, we need affordable EVs. But there's some stuff coming out of Europe, so maybe late 24, early 25. This Twingo concept, which is shown here, I think is actually slated for 2026. But there's a bit of European product that's coming that's going to be made in China. And then there's a few brands.
New Citroen C3 is interesting. It's same platform as the stuff that's retails here between $50,000 and $60,000. Slightly smaller battery. I think it's a 44 versus a 50, but it's 10,000 euros cheaper in Europe. That's a big chunk of coin.
Yeah,
that would put it in that kind of high 30, low 40k range here.
Yeah, there's that Renault 5 concept that they've shown. So, so here we go. 4,400 Nissan Leafs came here last year. Consumers want affordable EVs. And I think that 4,400 used Leafs is a very, very good example. So, but one of the things that actually works against us, or two things that work against us, is we like large cars here. Our average volume, and I don't mean in numbers, but sort of footprint of a car in New Zealand is pretty big. We seem to like big cars, and we say that we need it, but we don't, because most of our journeys are very, very short and in cities. But I think there's some interesting stuff coming out of Europe. There's some really interesting stuff coming out of China. Some of those brands will work out how to get those vehicles to market. I think it could be absolutely transformational if we're doing, if we've got stuff that is, let's say, Suzuki Swift plus 10% pricing. If we get there, I think that could be absolutely transformational. On the flip side, I think there's a ton of commercial vehicles coming that are BEV. There's absolutely a load of stuff that's coming. Really big ones, small ones, but nearly everything electric. So, Richard, you already know of a couple of brands that are coming, and I don't know whether those are public names yet, but there's a third brand sniffing around right now. There's another one that's nearly at market. I think you're going to see 4 to 5 EV van brands arrive this year. They're all talking about scalable architecture, skateboards, and I think we talk about the need for utes to become electric, but actually large corporates I think will question utes because they're electric ones are a way off, and they may well switch to electric vans because they're actually more a tool of the trade, more secure. You don't have to buy all the canopies and stuff.
The upcoming Ford Transit Custom in an EV double cab, to me, is just the ultimate New Zealand vehicle. That would be such a great vehicle.
Yeah, and in fact, Transit Connect, the next size down. In fact, those two Peugeots that they've got in the market here, but already a little bit too expensive. I think you could see that medium van and small vans. It'll start with large corporates and then it'll trickle down to SMEs. You're not going to get tradies out of utes, I don't think, for a long, long time. But there's a lot of stuff coming. There's a lot. I think that new Transit Custom and the Transit Connect I saw in Europe when I was there at Christmas, just sort of in the wild. There's a lot of stuff coming. So, I mean, I'm working on
hearing very strong things out of Europe about the LDV MIFA 7, kind of their next generation van product.
Yeah. I mean, look, last year LCV EV sales were about 1.5% for the year, whereas passenger vehicles were about 20, weren't they, for the year?
Sorry, eDeliver 7, not MIFA 7. Yeah,
got it. Yes, yeah. No, eDeliver 7 looks super cool. Yeah. So last year EV sales were about 1.5% of LCV, whereas for passenger vehicles they were about 20% for the year. So there's a big There's a lot of catch up for vans, and there's a lot of vans coming. So I think you're going to see choice and good pricing equals volume, basically. I think we're nearly there. I think this is my last one for the year. This is an easy one, actually, but it depends where you sit in the business. I bet marketing departments within dealer groups are already embracing AI, but DPs are scratching their head about it. It's just, I think dealers will really, really embrace AI this year. This isn't big game-changing stuff. It's about, it won't replace roles, but it will help dealerships do repetitive tasks. So, writing a trade me description, create the first draft in GPT. Writing a customer EDM, post for social media, write the first draft using Chat GPT. That's the kind of stuff where people will use it. Of course, they started using it last year, but I think you see so many bits of software, and the next gen Samsung phones got AI integrated. You'll see dealers embrace it as the year progresses, and it will really give them a shot in the arm in terms of operational effectiveness. Customer service chatbots, help with staff training, finding competitor specs. These are all tasks where you can use AI, not necessarily to give you the answer, but to create the first draft or to create a framework which you then refine. And that's the real game changer. People often talk about AI, but they don't talk about how you would change it all. So I think being operationally effective gives you the edge, and I think AI is the tool to being more operationally effective for a lot of dealers.
Awesome. I have sorry, go.
Oh, that's it. That's my top 10. And some of this stuff in here is just about, take some risks, try stuff out, fail, have a go at doing stuff and fail fast. Be a little bit bolder, and be flexible. And I think all that stuff comes together.
I have a question that's essentially addition of a slide. We're going to see some electrified utes turn up this year. We've got hybrid Hilux, plug-in hybrid Ranger, but I think the big one that's gained a lot of attention is the PHEV and then BEV BYD utes. How do you think electrification is going to hit the ute market? I mean, do you think that BYD will quickly become like a top 3, top 4 ute, or do you think it's the tradies are going to need a little more convincing?
My view is that the corporates will embrace it potentially, but the traders will need more convincing. I think if you look at LDV T60, which I think was or ET60, which was a really, really great example of how not quite to do it. There was a lot of excitement about it, but it needs to deliver. The ute product is a really, really complicated product. And we went through this with X-Class when I worked for Mercedes. The brief for a ute is massive. It has to tow 3.5 tons. If you tow 2.5 tons, you're not in the game. So you got to tow 3.5 tons. You got to carry a big payload. You got to have decent performance. You got to be a double cab. There's lots and lots of things. So if you don't tow, if your tow rating's not there, and remember, tradies they're pretty tried and true sort of blue voters. They need a product that's at least as good as that vehicle that they're replacing. They're a tough nut to crack, I reckon. So I don't think it'll be a top 3. In fact, when you look at ute sales, there's 2 absolute leaders. There's a clear third runner. Then the next group is sort of that tier 2, and there's a lot of people at 1%. A lot of people at 1%. The challenge for them is to not be a 1%er and to be a volume player, and that actually is momentous. There's some good product that only sells 1% of ute sales.
I think you cracked it there. I was going to say, just a lot of, I suspect people in Wellington fail to understand how the ute market works. And the simple test is, and this is a lot truer than you think, when you toss your keys on the bar top at the end of the day, if it doesn't say Ranger or Hilux on the key fob, you're instantly a second-class ute driver. And I know that sounds a bit wanky to say it, but the truth is so many ute sales driven by not whether they're really good or not. We're not saying whether Ranger or Hilux any better at product in terms of the actual product itself than its competitors, but its credibility amongst the guys that put their life savings and financial risk on a vehicle with bigger wheels and bull bars and looks good and looks cool and they feel good about taking the work. It's about badge on the side and the front. Nothing to do with whether it's any good or not.
I think you can get away with a Triton in the bar, but they might make you pay up front for your round of beers. I mean, it's
that's right. Oh, they only give you the Triton, mate. Oh, okay. Well, never mind. Look, next year, mate, you'll make it to you'll be the lead hand rather than the second lead hand. Good on you, mate. Try.
Totally random question for you, Anthony. How did the X Class get to market without anywhere to put your cell phone?
Do you know, X Class was from a concept point of view, made absolute sense to me. Mercedes-Benz does commercial vehicles, they do passenger vehicles. The market's absolutely right. That design, that product got watered down. So I remember sitting in a mock-up for the cabinet. It was amazing. And then you get to the real product, and it had a Nissan Key on the 2.5 on the 2.5 liter versions. It just got watered down, and they just must have had too many. They decided they needed a handbrake, a physical handbrake lever, because drivers wanted something traditional, which ate up into space. So it had terrible storage in the cabin, that car, absolutely terrible storage. That 3 liter 3.5 liter V6 was a beautiful, but the cabin used to frustrate the hell out of me. But
you'd lift up the armrest to expect storage, and there was like a tiny little sliver left. They'd filled it with something.
It was just, I think it was death by 1,000 cuts. X Class. Yeah. There's a podcast entirely on X Class failings and how they could have turned it around, if you ask me, because it should have been, by rights, an exceptionally well executed product, and it drove really, really well.
It did,
considering what it was based on, with really excellent NVH. But yeah, that's a story for another day.
Yeah. Look, I think we have covered off a lot there. We're over an hour. Now, this will be sticking around online, so if you want to share it with your colleagues, please do so. Anthony, where can people get hold of you if they want to talk further with you about your services or your predictions for the year?
Well, funny you should ask that. Always just go to boostauto.co.nz. You can sign up for my blog there as well, which I write sporadically depending on how busy I am, or you can email me at hello@boostauto.
No worries at all. Look, thank you so much for that. Thanks, Graham. I know you've got to run, and we'll catch everyone next week, but not Graham, on the AutoTalk Weekly Wrap. Catch you later.
Happy sailing, Graham. Thank you.